What about your Hebrew? Is it? Yeah? Okay. No, I'll talk in English. Okay, so I prepared the lecture in English.
Me too.
Yeah.
Everything else.
Yeah, everything else is in English. Okay, so I'll talk in English. So this would be something really old-fashioned. I will read from paper, and I have no presentation, but a book from 1832, which is the book I will talk about. And this is actually it's the the second edition from 1902, but it's actually the old book. It's the dissertation of the founder of the Jewish Reform movement, Abraham Geiger. And he was the first, one of the first Dr. Rabbiner, as we say in German. Okay, so a rabbi that also Geiger. That's the point. So when the young Jewish student Abraham Geiger came to the University of Bonn in 1829, he was 19 years old and belonged to the first generation of educated middle-class Jews to take up studies at German universities. Soon his generation would turn into the first generation of German Dr. Rabbiner and change the face of Western Judaism completely, combining classical rabbinical training, contrary to the modern Reform rabbis, with the method of the university. And this, of course, created serious problems of the consciousness of the young rabbis. It also created an entirely new approach to the old Jewish traditions in text and in ritual. Geiger would only 10 years after his studies in Bonn turn into something like a Jewish Martin Luther, if you like, involuntarily actually splitting now also the Jewish religion into an Orthodox and into a Reform denomination. You all know this, with all the many consequences that such a separation usually has. But when the young Geiger came to Bonn as a student, he had no intention whatsoever to become a rabbi. He was actually disgusted by the way he was taught Talmud as a child in his hometown of Frankfurt, and he was repelled by what he saw as the hypocrisy of Orthodox, as he called it, Afterphilologie, like pseudo-philology, might be a good translation, in the interpretation of the Bible. On the other hand, though, Geiger was enamored with Oriental languages. Already as the enormously talented teenager that he was, he began the study of the language of the Mishnah, a study that culminated in a controversial book many years later, claiming that the Talmud essentially misunderstood the language and thus also the theological message of the Mishnah. Of course, Geiger also mastered the Aramaic language from early on, a language he loved because it was the simple tongue of the people, as he wrote. So little wonder that when Geiger came to Bonn, he planned to study Orientalism and not theology. Yeah? Immediately he took up studies in Arabic with the leading expert available in Germany at this time, Georg Wilhelm Freytag, the author of the famous and influential Arab-Latin dictionary that some might know. He taught Geiger Arabic grammar, and soon Geiger developed also in this language an almost intuitive understanding of the meaning of difficult passages, which earned him not only the praise but also the friendship of Freytag. Now, in the spring of 1831, something happened in Bonn that would forever change Koran research in a very new and interesting way. Geiger noted in his diary on April 29, 1831, that Freytag had suggested to him to study the first 3 surahs of the Koran. The background of this assignment was that Freytag planned to offer a prize among his students for the best essay on the question of the Jewish sources of the Koran, probably because he had an apprehension that there were more Jewish elements in the Koran than only the reinterpretation of the Bible. That was established knowledge at this time among most of the European scholars. Geiger immediately understood the challenge. In fact, the prize essay question was tailored for him by Freytag. And this is because of his long and intense training in rabbinical sources. Studying the surahs, Geiger soon found what he and maybe also Freytag had expected. And now I quote again from the diary of Geiger. Everywhere there are reminiscences of Judaism, he noted in his diary, but not but to the Judaism of the rabbis, shaped as it was by fairy tale-like freakishness of the Orient. Märchenhafte Grillenfängerei. So this is very hard 19th century German. What Geiger had discovered here was actually really a revolution in Quran research. The author of the Quran not only knew the Jewish and the Christian Bible, he was also strongly influenced by post-biblical rabbinical literature of Mishnah, Talmud and Midrashim. Only a student belonging to the first generation of university-trained Jews could have discovered this striking fact in its full force, because only somebody like Abraham Geiger combined within the same person the necessary mastery of the Arabic language on the one hand, of the holy text of the Quran, and at the same time profound rabbinical knowledge. On purpose, he had used for his study only the actual Arabic text and no commentaries of the Quran. Geiger later explained to avoid to see the Quran through the eyes of later Arabic dogmatics, as he wrote. So, you all guessed it, Geiger wrote the essay in the first months of 82, won the prize, handed it in as a dissertation and earned a doctorate for this essay in 1834 from the University of Marburg. When Geiger's essay on the rabbinic influences on the Quran appeared as a book, here's the book. Okay. So when this dissertation appeared as a book in 1933, it was soon celebrated, writes Susanna Heschel, not myself, all over Europe as the beginning of a new understanding of the origins of Islam within Judaism. End of quote. Leading non-Jewish and Jewish scholars of the 19th century called the book epoch-making, and no serious scholar of Islam and Quran could subsequently ignore the research results of young Abraham Geiger. Geiger himself, however, now had a fateful choice to make. As a result of his early and unexpected fame, before him lay a distinguished career as an Orientalist at a German university, the leading institutions of research and all over Europe. But, as a practicing Jew, Geiger was not allowed to hold an academic position at the German university at this time. He had to accept baptism to start his career at the university, and for the sake of Reform Judaism, you all know, Geiger decided against this option, became a very poor community rabbi in the small town of Wiesbaden with a salary so low he couldn't even marry his fiancée for 8 years, something like that. But Geiger never gave up on scholarship. He actually devoted all of his time that his rabbinical duties left him to research and publication, and it was this fruitful interaction of first-hand knowledge of the needs of the Jewish community with critical scholarly understanding of Judaism that gave birth to what we now call Reform Judaism. The attempt to provide actually the Jewish religion with a secure scientific fundament in order to steer through the religious crisis of the modern age. Geiger became at the same time a leading Reform rabbi and a leading scholar of the new movement of Wissenschaft des Judentums, the science of Judaism, and this combination was no coincidence. Only the academic study of Judaism, Geiger believed, and many other of the protagonists of those two parallel movements actually, could provide a new Jewish identity after the traditional Talmudic lifestyle was now defunct in Germany, and would thus give German Jewry a new motivation to adhere to the synagogue. In this sense, and I'll come back to the dissertation, in this sense Geiger's discovery of the rabbinical influences on the Quran was not the end actually of his academic career, but the very beginning of a lifelong research project that Geiger intended to prove the vast contribution that Judaism had brought to culture and civilization. In strict antagonism to the repeated Christian claims of the outdatedness of Judaism with the emergence of Christianity, Geiger developed a sophisticated theory of Judaism as the original true religion, with the two daughter religions actually assigned to spread Jewish monotheism in the pagan world. Now, if even Islam was built on Jewish theorems, not on biblical, but on rabbinical theorems, on texts and rituals. As Geiger's dissertation had shown, the theory was only further substantiated. For this reason, it was decisive that it was precisely rabbinical literature and not the biblical prophets that were, at the time celebrated by all theologians of all religions. Christianity and Judaism, of course. Talmudic texts have often been ridiculed by modern scholarship as a symbol for the degeneration of the Jewish intellectual qualities after the emergence of Christianity. If now those texts became the key for the understanding of Islam, this assessment was no longer valid, and Judaism was in a way re-established as a highly influential force in the formation of the religious traditions of the world, even many centuries after the closing of the canon of the Hebrew Bible. But even apart from that, Geiger's essay from 33, in fact, I'm living in the 19th century. If I say 33, it's 1833, okay? So we're all on the same page, right? 33. It's 1833. This essay is much more than a philological study of rabbinical influences on Islam. It also contains some surprising theological insights, especially given Geiger's conviction that Judaism, and I quote, is the one and only religion of revelation. End of quote. While Christianity and Islam are not new religions, but only byproducts of the eternal truth of Judaism. Geiger had divided his essay on the Koran into two main sections, with only the second section dealing with the actual content of Jewish texts that the Koran adopted from rabbinical sources, while the first part discussed extensively the question what the theological and historical reasons and preconditions for the author of the Koran were to absorb Jewish ideas and texts into his own work and system of thought. And it is this first chapter of the theological reasons that is actually much less discussed by contemporary scholarship, and this is what I want to focus on from now. In general, several scholars have already pointed out that Geiger sweepingly corrected all the previously dominating views of Christian polemics against the Quran. Muhammad, it had been claimed again and again by Christian scholars, was a conscious impostor and charlatan who deliberately falsified the Bible. Right? Geiger, however, contrary to that view, took Muhammad very seriously in a very remarkable way. Geiger believed that Muhammad was actually honest. He was honestly convinced of the divinity of his mission, as Geiger wrote. Geiger was not prepared to see the Quran as a deliberate deception. But this new understanding of Muhammad as a real enthusiast, and now again, the German word is Schwärmer. Now, Schwärmer is something that really can't be translated into any other language. In Hebrew, Professor Boashus once asked me to translate Schwärmer into Hebrew, and I said, Chai Baseret. This is what they use in 19th century for Kabbalists, usually, the word Schwärmer. Okay, so this is how Geiger describes Muhammad, a real Schwärmer, a real enthusiast. My translation into English, not sure, but this is what he says. But the interesting aspect is that it is a positive term. It's not a fraud. So it's somebody who's really enthusiastic about what he does. Right. So, but everything like this is only the outer form, actually, of a deeper inner theological understanding of Muhammad's religious intentions as they were described by Geiger. In this respect, Geiger made several interesting and far-reaching claims in his book. First and foremost, among them, the assumption that the idea of an exclusive monotheism that was called in our days by Jan Assmann the idea of a Mosaic distinction. Might have heard about this. Was completely unknown to Muhammad. He had no concept, says Geiger, of the exclusivity of holy texts. That is, he had no exclusive truth claims concerning the literary sources of Islam, his own religion actually, while rejecting the truth claims of other religions. The fact that the Quran freely used Jewish text material demonstrates, Geiger argued forcefully, that the Quran's idea of monotheism was indeed non-exclusive, universal and non-competitive. For Muhammad, Geiger wrote, I quote, "The unification of all religious views whatsoever was necessary for the salvation of humanity." Salvation is Heil in German. Now this, the main criticism of all monotheistic religious systems put forth in the modern period, several instances from Ernest Renan in the 19th century to the above-mentioned Egyptologist Jan Assmann, is that exclusive revelationary truth claims necessarily actually lead to religious intolerance, if not even to wars in the name of religion, declaring other religions as false and idolatrous, as monotheists usually do, and coding the adherents of those religions not only as delusional but actually as sinful and wicked. This is the direct result in this view of Assmann and Renan of a religiously motivated belief to possess the absolute truth of a holy text. But in fact, as Assmann wrote, for example, all humanity and all religions are equally far removed from truth. And the very precondition for tolerance, and I quote Assmann here, is the capacity to historicize and to relativize your own position. End of quote. Now, there's a lot of discussion about Assmann and all these theories. I think it's kind of easily refuted what they say, and I really don't understand the whole mess about it. But every more sophisticated study of the really complex history of religious thought brought to light that the so-called holiness of untouchable textual revelation soon turns out as a legal fiction in almost every religion, because it is continuously broken by radical exegesis supporting openly the intended purpose of the exegete. While the deity is indeed often identified with absolute truth, philosophers of religion usually agree, and not only philosophers, many thinkers of religion usually agree that the ways of God are inscrutable. So that what Assmann and others have missed or confused is the important distinction between the belief of possessing the truth and the existence of truth, right? So theologians of all monotheistic faiths have long held that we must strive for divine knowledge and absolute truth, but that eventually we will always fall short of knowing God, right? So in this sense, the monotheistic God is not the true God of my own religion, but the true God. Full stop. Relativist truth claims, as per Assmann, however, are by definition no truth claims at all. Now, interestingly, returning to Geiger, if I have only remembered, Geiger himself, as a theologian, was not only a strict adherent to this higher, non-exclusive form of monotheism, he attempted to show in his book that Muhammad, the author of Koran, promoted a non-competitive deity as the very intention of the Koran, despite the fact that Islam today is often perceived as the, really, how would you say, less tolerant religion. Let's put it like this, okay? This is why Muhammad could absorb so much material from rabbinic Judaism. Borrowing from earlier religious views was no strange idea for Muhammad. Geiger argued to the contrary. This technique rather served his true purpose, according to Geiger. Geiger, I quote, he did not demand exclusivity. He did not come to erect a new building to destroy all previous religious thought. The very opposite is true. Muhammad tried to erect an eclectic religion from all available building material, Geiger wrote. The changes he made to this material had the simple objective to cleanse it from later additions and alterations of the human hand. The only new idea found in this old but purified religion was the claim of Muhammad's prophecy himself. But even here, he saw himself merely as the last one in a long chain of previous mouthpieces of God. Muhammad, Geiger wrote, was well in agreement with earlier revelations and tried only to enforce them again after they were corrupted by augmentations and inappropriate interpretations. End of quote. Muhammad's God, therefore, is not an exclusive God of Islam in Geiger's reading of the Quran, but it is the one true God, the same God that had revealed himself to the Hebrew prophets before. At this point, kind of surprisingly, Geiger used this line of argument even for a flagrant attack on Christianity and its supersessionist view of Judaism, directly actually contrasting Christianity, the Christian approach to Judaism, with what Geiger perceived as the religious tolerance of the original Islam. The times of Muhammad had not yet reached, he writes, such a pitch of so-called enlightenment as to consider the followers of one creed only as in the right and to regard everything belonging to any other belief as worthless. End of quote. This false exclusivity claim was reserved for Christianity, according to Geiger, which reduced all humanism to be only a Christian property, and to condemn especially Judaism as crafty and lifeless. Muhammad's Islam, contrary to that, could still dare to give rise to similar ideas as found in Judaism without the fear that that similarity would make its teachings unacceptable. Obviously, Muhammad could not include into his religious system the entire Talmudic law of Judaism. Geiger continued, he had to rewrite and reshape even those parts that he did adopt into Judaism, because this was exactly his theology of religious tolerance, his system of conflation, as Geiger called it, Verschmelzungssystem, that made him unable to accept the Jewish dogmatic fiction of an unalterable God-given law from Mount Sinai. Jewish law was holy because it came from God himself, who was not only the God of Israel, but the God of all humanity. Thus, rendering specific historical events of divine revelation was irrelevant for this universal theology. When thus for Geiger, Muhammad intended to re-purify all religion by purging all man-made influences from the original divine text, this was a project that came very close to Geiger's own project, to Geiger's own ambitions as a Jewish reformer. Hence, we find in Geiger's surprisingly sympathetic treatment of Islam also insights concerning the concept of the holiness of text in the thinking of the early Jewish Reform theology. The fight against legal fiction is one of the foremost elements to outwardly uphold the authority of certain laws for reasons of dogmatic tradition, while at the same time bending or even circumventing the same law was an orthodox praxis that the reformers rejected from early on. In this context, Geiger might have identified that Muhammad's unconventional treatment of Jewish legal texts, boldly making them fit his own purposes. But what is probably more important is another related aspect, the treatment of holy text. The treatment of the holy text themselves. In the same way the Koran was originally designed, Geiger seems to say here, no canonical text is divine because of its outer form, of its verbatim structure, but only because of its theological meaning. It is not the revelationary event that authorized the text, but its divine content. The ability of divine law contained in this text to elevate the believer to a truly ethical way of life, that is to introduce the idea of God into human society. In Geiger's main work, published in 1857 and dedicated to the original text of the Hebrew Bible, this idea reappears actually. Editorial changes made to the text of the Hebrew Bible in antiquity would neither mean that those editors reduced the holiness of the text, nor that the Bible, as we have it today, is less authentic or genuine. Rather, what was later achieved by means of exegesis was earlier achieved by additions, editorial changes. This is before the letter of the text was canonized. It was achieved by what Geiger called Überarbeitung, revision of the biblical text. So this is in fact the very same thought that the young Geiger proposed as an explanation for Muhammad's adoption and revision of Jewish texts in the Koran, based on a non-exclusive universal monotheism that Geiger himself shared, of course, with what he assumed to have been Muhammad's view of God. The Quran had to be the latest expression of divine truth. The source of this truth was the one God that Muhammad shared with Judaism, which is why Jewish texts could be openly reused in the Quran, but the lingual expression of this truth had to fit the need of time and circumstances of Muhammad's own work. Thank you.
One really quick question over here.
Oh,
yes,
quick question.
It's got to be quick. Otherwise, we're gonna have a great break afterwards, and we can.
So the question is, was Islam just a cipher for Judaism for him? That is, he was talking about Judaism and using Islam. He might not even know him, but why would he become such a great champion of Islam? I mean, it's not exactly, I don't know him, but I would suspect that he was talking, and then because what he did with Islam, he then did it in Judaism.
First of all, not with Islam, but with original Muhammad thought. There's a big difference. Because he is against Talmudic reinterpretation of Judaism, so he's against Hadith. So this is, I mean, if you're right, then only for the original form of Islam as he perceived it. I mean, this is the first limitation, and the second is the answer is actually no, because
you historian.
Because this is the problem if you have 20 minutes. I mean, he's very critical of Islam and he's very critical of the Quran. What is important for me, or what was important for me to point out here, was that he was also very sympathetic, and that his view on theology in Quran is very similar to his own. Okay, but the short answer to your question is no. He's very well aware of the differences between the two.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I have the unpleasant duty of maintaining our times here, and our next talk